Chapter 2. When I woke up, Nathan's bed was empty, and it felt late. I checked my watch. Past 10. Damn, I thought. They'll think I'm lazy. I ran into the shower, then went downstairs with my wet hair dripping into my shirt. Hearing voices in the kitchen, I headed there. I knew I was looking at Paige the second I saw her red hair. It was soft and silky and curly, like in the picture Nate had showed me, and she sat, maybe on purpose, where a bar of sunlight hit it. Nathan sat at the table too, and they were having coffee. "Hey," he said, getting up to pour me a cup. "Hi, Tim," Paige said in this ringing kind of voice. "I'm Paige." "Nice to meet you." I didn't offer to shake hands. If I'd touched her hand, I couldn't have promised to stop there. She was so beautiful and alive. She seemed to be all over the place, even sitting still in a kitchen chair watching me, smiling up at Nathan as he refilled her cup. Her heart-shaped face had a delicate pointed chin, and her eyes were gray-green. She looked like an Irish princess. I regretted not being there when they first saw each other, so I'd know if they had kissed. Hard to imagine old Nathan waking up enough to lay one on her the way I'd have done. He did seem to look at her a lot, though, and I could feel my envy kicking in. I could not believe a girl like that waited for me anywhere in the world, and I started to get a familiar, left-out feeling. But I never had a feeling of not wanting Nate to have her. I really need to insist on that. "Sorry I slept so late," I said, easing into a chair. "Summer vacation," Nathan reminded me. "Yeah, but aren't we supposed to be working?" "Not on Saturday. We're supposed to be goofing off." Paige apparently knew all about our job. Her big, merry eyes watched us both as we talked. "Where's everybody else?" I asked. "Dad's finishing up his sermon. Mom and Artie went to some women's tea or something." "Ugh," Paige shuddered. "Glad I'm not a preacher's kid. All this stuff you have to do." Nathan quirked an eyebrow at me. "Forgot to mention this," he said, "but I'm kind of expected to go to church. You don't have to, but—" He shrugged, but he was waiting to see what I'd say. Okay," I said. "I'll give it a shot." "I'm a Presbyterian," Paige informed me, mock seriously. "I go down the street." "And you guys are Methodist, right?" "United Methodist. We merged a few years ago." "I was baptized a Roman Catholic," I said, just to be conversational. But they both looked at me a little wide-eyed. "No kidding?" Nathan asked. "You go to Mass and everything?" I felt annoyed for some reason. "Well, not here lately, Nathan. But yeah, my mom made me go the whole route when I was a kid." "Wow," Paige said. "Berry Springs doesn't even have a Catholic church." This was not helping my insecure, left-out feeling. I looked at Nathan. "So are you Methodists going to let me in?" "Hey, it's no big deal," Nathan assured me hurriedly. "It's just interesting, that's all. You and I never talked about this." "I'll try not to embarrass you by crossing myself," I snapped. He flinched and his face got red, so then I felt like a shit, of course. Paige kept quiet and watched us. "I'm kidding," I said. "Yeah, I know," he said, and took a quick sip of coffee, but he wouldn't look back up at me. Paige changed the subject, while I was still wondering why this had gotten to be such a touchy one so fast. "Nathan says you play and sing and you've got some tunes," she said to me. "I'd like to hear you." "Thanks. I want to hear you sing, too." Nathan brightened a little. "I thought the three of us could work up some stuff together. 3-part harmony, like CSN. "And Young," Paige said. "You look like Neil Young." I sighed. I had never been told that before in my life before I came to Tennessee. Apparently they really admired old Neil in these parts. "Guess I'll have to lay in a supply of green plaid flannel shirts." Paige laughed and stood up. "Speaking of uniforms, I have to put mine on and go to work. I'm on day shift today. I have to wear this little sailor blouse and everything. It's pretty gross." Long John Silver's, I remembered, as Nathan and I got up too. Paige went around the table to kiss him, standing on tiptoe. My heart thumped. He looked pleased and embarrassed, trying not to smile and completely failing not to blush. I pretended I hadn't watched. "Bye," Paige said, and went through the back porch and out the door. She drove a little blue Pinto, I could see, craning my neck to look out the window after her. "She's great," I told Nathan. He just smiled again and gathered up the coffee cups to put them in the sink. "You hungry?" "No, I don't eat breakfast." "Me neither. We'll get some lunch in a little while. Dad said, why don't I take you over to the church, show you around? Sure. He glanced at me as if waiting for me to go first. He kept forgetting he was the one in charge. He'd always rather someone else would be the leader so he could sit back and listen and observe, except, of course, when he played music. That was the only time I ever saw him completely sure of himself. Finally he drifted through the back porch, and I trotted along behind like a puppy. Outside the day was already heating up. It felt good, though, and I could hear birds and leaves rustling. Everything felt closer, more intimate than being outside in California. We crossed the gravel parking lot to the side door of the church. My first impression as we entered a high-ceilinged hall was of dimness and coolness and age. The place smelled old, not dirty or unpleasant, just old hot wood and stone and dust. Nathan led me down the hall and stopped at an open door. Dad? Well, hi, fellas, Brother Whitley said from behind his typewriter. He leaned back in his chair. Tim, sleep well? Afraid so, I said ruefully, and he laughed. You're supposed to sleep late on your vacation, he said. Now Nathan here, he's up all hours. I never know when I'm going to hear him rummaging around. Nathan peered over at the paper in the typewriter. That looks like a rest home list to me, he said, and grinned. Brother Whitley cringed in mock fear. Apparently this was a running joke. Can't put it off any longer, he said, and explained to me. I'm updating my list of church members in nursing homes, and every time I do, one of them dies as soon as I get the new list typed. So now I'm superstitious about doing it. I put it off as long as I can. Altar Guild done yet? Nathan asked him. I thought I'd show Tim the ropes. Sure, they're out. You guys go right ahead. Altar Guild? I asked as we went on down the hall. They come and put out new flowers and get communion ready. Communion's always the first Sunday of the month. You just have communion once a month? From what I remembered about the Catholics, you couldn't walk in the door without having a wafer and a chalice shoved in your face. Nathan glanced at me, but apparently still felt safe enough to explain. Yeah, I know you guys focus more on the Mass. We're more into the sermon and responses and stuff. It's just different. We came through a side door into the front of the sanctuary. It looked beautifully old-fashioned, everything dark wood and curved wooden pews that looked, and were, I found, hard and creaky. The carpet and pew cushions were dark red plush. The plaster walls had stains and cracks in several places, and I wouldn't have trusted the high balcony in the back to hold up under my weight alone. The old stained glass windows in beautiful colors showed Jesus as shepherd and Jesus with angels. The small choir loft sat up behind the pulpit, and the organ was a cheap Hammond. Nathan showed me the circular stacked trays of individual communion cups, all filled with what he said was only grape juice, not wine. I heard that one time before we moved here, the Altar Guild ran out of grape juice, so they mixed up some grape jello and used that, and that night it got real cold in the church. I started laughing, and he looked pleased that I really did think that was funny. It's true. He led me up sagging stairs and showed me the Sunday school rooms, the ones for older people full of folding chairs and pictures of Jesus. No crucifixes, I had noticed, not even in the sanctuary. I was particularly interested in the high school room, which had been painted in shiny red, white, and blue with an old comfortable couch and a couple of beanbag chairs. Nathan said he'd helped paint it when he was a senior. We had a painting party that lasted all weekend. Back in the hall, he opened a cleaning closet. This is the upstairs vacuum. There's a bigger one downstairs. Basically, we have to dust and vacuum and keep the bathrooms clean. Then he showed me the kitchen and the linoleumed fellowship hall. The Kitchen Guild keeps this place in shape. We just have to mop once a week. It was when he was dragging out the big downstairs vacuum to see how it worked that I felt a sudden surge of excitement, or maybe joy, as if I'd walked into a movie showing a whole new phase of my life, being in a different place with new people and new things to do, when a few months back I hadn't even known Nathan. The idea that life could change so quickly seemed a happy, wonderful thing then, and I knew it was going to be a fine summer, just fine. We left the church at the street door so Nathan could show me the cornerstone that said 1874. Then we ambled back around to the parking lot again. The thing about that dense, buzzy, hazy heat was that it made you want to move very slowly or not at all. I began to understand the stereotype of Southerners sitting around on their porches, sipping mint juleps, fanning, listening to the leaves rustle and the cicadas hum, with everything in a sort of whispery, slow motion. As we came around the corner of the church, we saw a man standing in the parking lot and looking in our direction. He watched us approach, not raising his hand to wave. I glanced at Nate, who was frowning slightly. Some transient, I figured, until I saw the snappy little Triumph parked in the shade. "Can I help you?" Nathan asked him. "You live around here?" the man asked. Nathan nodded toward the parsonage. "I live right there." "Ah," the man said. He drew it out like, "ah." I couldn't tell how old he was, except that he was probably older than us. He wore plain jeans and a blue work shirt like Nathan, and his hair, I would have killed for hair that long. It beat Mark Farner's in Grand Funk, blonde and straight and all the way down his back. He looked Nathan over through pale eyes squinted against the sunlight. He completely ignored me. "I hear you're a musician." "Yeah, I am," Nathan said. "How'd you know that?" The guy smiled, showing white teeth, and stuck out his hand. "My name's Egan Couts." "Nathan Whitley, and this is Tim Benicia." Nathan shook his hand, and so did I. Egan Couts's hand was dry and hot, not damp, as you might expect in the heat. Even when he shook my hand, he never took his eyes off Nathan. Somehow the whole thing felt a little strange to me, but Nate didn't seem disturbed. "I live down the river a little ways," Egan told us, or rather, told Nathan. "Right past the county line. I've opened a bar there on the main road, and I'm looking for some live music." "Oh, yeah?" Nathan said. "Wondered if you'd bring your guitar out and let me hear you." "How'd you know I play guitar?" "Somebody mentioned it. You're the preacher's son, right?" Egan smiled again, the kind of smile some people have where the first thing you notice is their canine teeth. "And I hear you're pretty good." "Actually," Nathan cleared his throat, "I'm part of a threesome, with Tim here and a girl named Paige on vocals." Egan looked at Nathan for one more second, then turned to me. "I think that's great. Would you and Paige come out too, Tim?" "Sure," I said. "What kind of music are you looking for?" "Oh, anything. Well, maybe not too much country. Just the popular acoustic stuff people are doing." "When do you want us to come?" Nathan asked. "How about tonight?" Nate and I looked at each other. This was moving pretty fast, in spite of his quick thinking about getting Paige and me in on the act. I was kind of surprised when he said firmly, "We'll be there." "Where?" I asked. Egan pointed south. "About 2 miles that way on 26. The tavern's called River House on the right." "I know that place," Nathan said. "Used to be Jim's, right?" "That's right. Now it's Egan's." We all laughed a little, and this time Egan's smile included me. He was the kind of person you liked in spite of yourself, maybe even against your better judgment. "Well," he said, "I'd better get going. See you guys tonight between 8 and 9, okay?" We watched him drive off in his Triumph. "Man," I said, "can you believe that?" When Nathan didn't answer, I looked at him. He seemed pale and dazed, but I figured he was just excited about the offer we'd had. "We better work up some stuff fast," I told him. "We've got like 8 hours. He only said, and ran his hand back through his hair. Then he said, "Lord, I am so tired." And before I knew it, he had sat right down in the gravel, like his legs had given out from under him. "Nate?" I said. Nathan looked up at me in a sort of unfocused way, and I was startled to see dark smudges under his eyes and lines on either side of his mouth. "Tired," he said again, and I could barely hear him. It scared me. I'd never seen anybody fade that fast. What if he was sick, with leukemia or something, and nobody knew it yet? Then I remembered he'd been up half the night and hadn't eaten. "Come on." I stuck my hand down at him. "Let's get inside and get some lunch." Nathan seemed to gather what strength he had left and reached for my hand. He just about pulled me off my feet, hoisting himself up. I had to brace both my legs. He felt like dead weight. But he followed me inside to the kitchen, and by that time his face had more color, and his eyes were able to look directly at me. "There's sandwich stuff in the fridge," he offered. So we made lunch meat sandwiches, and pretty soon he started talking about Egan Couts and his invitation to play at River House. "I've got to call Paige," he kept saying. "They get mad if she gets calls at work, but I need to tell her to get here as quick as she can." "When is she done?" 6. "That doesn't leave much time for her to practice." Nathan shrugged. "She doesn't need to practice. She and I already know a lot of songs we can do together." "Which leaves me," I admitted. "Listen, I appreciate you letting me in on this. I just hope I don't drag you guys down." "Are you kidding? We need you to set the tempo. You're a terrific rhythm guitarist. You keep time better than anybody I've ever heard." Since Nathan himself kept excellent time, this was generous praise. "The 3 o'clock would have gone under a long time ago if the tempo was left up to Mike," he said darkly, meaning the drummer. "Hey, know how you can tell if the drum riser's level?" "How?" "The drummer has drool coming out both sides of his mouth." Nathan cracked up, laughing so hard he had to lay his head on the table. It was a rare thing to see him let go and laugh like that. Finally he sat back up, still laughing, his eyes crinkled. "Man, this is going to be great," he said. "You and me and Paige. It'll be magic. You wait and see." We made a list of 6 songs, 2 of which were Nathan's own. He wanted to do one of mine, but I pointed out that Paige didn't know any of my stuff, whereas she and I both knew his. "Okay," he said reluctantly, "but if we get this gig, we're working up your tunes too." The others were Pieces of April, Get Together, Summer Breeze, and a new one by this guy named Jim Croce that everybody was wild about. "Wonder if he's got a piano," I said. "If he does, you ought to fool around on it a little, so he'll know you're not limited to guitar." Nathan nodded. "Listen, Dad'll be home for lunch pretty soon, and if we're here, he'll want us to hang around and talk to him. Let's take our guitars down to the river." "Down to the river?" "Sure, I play down there all the time. Good place to be alone." So we carried our guitars through the tall grass in the back field, following a path I couldn't see until we were right up on it. Sweating in the sun, and listening anxiously for the rattlesnakes Brother Whitley had told us about, I trudged behind Nathan, who strode along light as air. The food certainly seemed to have revived him. We reached the line of trees and went into the shade, where big ropey vines hung from the branches. Nathan led me to a huge tree he said was a sycamore. From there you could peer over the bluff and look down at Green River, slow-moving like everything else in the heat. "So I guess they named it that because it's always green?" "Unless it rains hard. Then it's brown like coffee and milk." Nathan opened his guitar case, took out his guild, and settled himself happily on the ground with his back against the big tree. He looked at me as proudly as if he'd invented the whole place. "Great, isn't it?" "Sure." I picked my way nervously back from the edge of the bluff. I never had been much of a nature boy. I imagined those rattlesnakes swinging from tree to tree, and thought longingly of the clean, dry hills of California. "The mosquitoes aren't too bad right now, but come sundown you'll get bit to death. I never come down here then." "Good thinking." I took out my guitar and sat down opposite him on a clump of green grass that didn't look as if it held any surprises. "You and Paige hang out here a lot, I bet." Nathan looked blank. "She's been here, yeah," he said, tuning his high E string, "but not a lot." Snakes or not, if Paige was mine and this was a place to be alone, I would have had her down here every chance I got. Had, of course, being the operative word. "Geez, Nathan, she's such a beautiful lady, and you act like she's your sister or something." "What do you mean?" I couldn't very well tell him what I'd just been thinking. "You're so casual with her," I said lamely. Nathan just gave me an absent, you're-so-strange look. "No, I'm not," he said, still trying to get his B string perfect. "You've only seen us together about 10 minutes. Which was true, so I shut up. But it occurred to me that Paige might not hold any interest for Nathan at all if she weren't musical herself. I wondered if she knew that, and how she felt about it. We worked on Pieces of April, which I thought, and still do, that nobody could sing as well as Nathan. But he said to let Paige sing it. "You wait till you hear her. We can do the harmony at the end about It's a Morning in May." So we practiced that, me hitting the high falsetto, which I could nail right on the money as far as pitch. Then we fooled around some with the others we'd picked. But Nathan seemed inclined just to go up to the river house tonight and wing it. That's what he wants, he insisted calmly. I know that's what he wants. Real relaxed, not the three of us putting on a show. He was probably right, and I knew I tended to overthink stuff like this. He knows we haven't had time to prepare, Nathan said, and I'm not going to spoil it by getting all worked up and nervous. He rested his head against the tree trunk and let his gaze wander through the treetops, idly plucking some chiming chords which I followed, one strum behind. I kept eyeing him, still not sure he wasn't harboring some sickness or other. His face seemed to be falling back into those tired lines. I could see the marks on either side of his mouth, the way I had when he'd sat down in the parking lot. "Hey, Tim," he said finally. "You believe in God, right?" "Well, yeah. I'm a Catholic, remember," I almost said, but decided not to push it. "You think music could be counted as, serving God?" He half smiled at me in case I laughed, but I knew he didn't want me to. "I'm talking about just regular music, not church music." "I don't know why not," I told him. "Music makes people happy, doesn't it? I figure that makes the world better." "Well, that's what I think," he said, and played a little bit more. Then he said, "My dad, of course, doesn't see it that way." Why does that not surprise me, I thought. "Oh?" "He thinks it's," Nathan shrugged, "self-indulgent." "So's breathing," I snapped. "That doesn't mean we're not supposed to do it, or that we could stop even if we wanted to." Nathan laughed a little. "Might have known you'd have something practical to say." "Does your dad really say that? Your music's self-indulgent?" "He doesn't use that word." Nathan's hand climbed the neck of his guitar, feeling out bar chords, but he wasn't listening to what he was doing. "He just acts like if it's not sacred music, it doesn't really count. And when I start talking about what I want to do with my own music, he says that I'm not doing it for God, I'm doing it for me." I didn't know what to think about that, except that it pissed me off, so I didn't say anything. "What'll he say about tonight?" Nathan closed his eyes briefly, and I wondered if he was afraid of his father. "I'm not going to tell him," he said. "Not unless we get hired. We can stash our guitars in the car, and then tonight just say we're going out driving around. That'll be true enough." "Nate, if this is going to be trouble for you..." He slammed his hand against the strings in a discord. "What am I supposed to do? Turn down a chance to play?" His voice was loud for Nathan. "This is what I want to do in life." "I know," I said, as mildly as I could. "And that's what he hates. If I go into music, he wants it to be church music, like Bach or somebody." "Yeah." Anyway, Nathan calmed down a little, his fingers making music on the strings again. "For all we know, this Egan guy'll never call us again, and then Dad won't get all worked up over nothing." "I see your point, but if it works out the other way, I don't want them blaming me." "You?" "The Californian, the outsider, the bad influence." I was half kidding, and Nathan grinned. He leaned forward ominously. "The Catholic," he said. I threw my pick at him. Our subterfuge with his parents worked simply because Nathan was so passive about it. We left our guitars in the station wagon, and after a congenial supper with the family, Nate just said calmly that we were going out driving around for a while. All they said back was, "All right, and have fun," whereas my mother would have questioned me and bitched at me all the way out the door. Again, I had the feeling of moving through such a big, airy place, free to stretch and breathe. Nathan had called Paige, who had agreed to meet us at River House. I wanted to dress up, wear my coolest shirt, but Nathan said not to look too eager. He only changed into a fresh blue work shirt, not even the fancy one artists had embroidered him for Christmas. As usual, he left the cuffs unbuttoned, so they slopped around his wrists. I looked at him dubiously. "Aren't you even going to comb your hair, or is that too eager?" He just shrugged and ran his hand back through it, making it look even more disheveled. I wondered if he fixed up better than this for church. He always kept clean and shaved, but he was completely indifferent about not looking rumpled. If he'd been anybody but Nathan, I'd have suspected him of doing it on purpose, to look poetic. We drove south on Main Street until we were officially out of town and driving through farmland. It wasn't dark yet, being summer, and I looked out across field after field, all of them bounded at the other side by the line of trees following Green River. "Did you notice what he said today?" I asked Nathan, "about how he lived down the river a ways? Most people would have said down the road." Nathan considered. "Except the river and the road are parallel," he pointed out, "so it's the same thing." "Well, it made it sound like he lives in a houseboat." "Maybe he does." "Yeah, that'd be cool." We laughed, and Nathan pulled into the last available space in front of what looked like an old frame house, front porch and everything. It was all lighted up, and through the windows, past the neon beer signs, I could see guys playing pool inside. A couple of others were smoking on the front porch. "There's Paige," Nathan said as we got out, and I saw a red head emerging from a blue Pinto. She came toward us, glancing nervously toward the porch. "Hey," she said, "Nathan, are you sure about this? This place has always been such a dive." I watched their gazes locking in contentedly on each other's face, the way I had seen other couples do, a peculiarly intimate kind of look. But Nathan didn't kiss her, maybe because of the men watching from the porch. I'd have laid my best one on her just to show off. He opened the gate of the station wagon to haul out the guitars. "It'll be okay," he told her. "It's probably better once you get inside." Then when we got to the porch, he hung back, letting me go first. I knew him well enough to realize it wasn't the audition making him nervous, but the prospect of a room full of strangers. Paige seemed to understand this, too. She took hold of his free hand. We heard a wave of voices and the click of pool cues as I opened the door. The customers were mostly what I'd have called rednecks, weathered men in work clothes and caps, looking like farmers. Nate told me later that they probably were. Most rural people in the area grew a couple acres of tobacco, even if they had jobs in town. And River House itself was indeed an old house, with the downstairs walls knocked out to make a big main room. The wooden floor shone with varnish, and at the far side of the room stood an ornate, antique bar. Egan stood behind it, drawing a mug of beer from a tap. I wouldn't have known him for the same guy I'd met today if it hadn't been for his hair. Maybe it was the dim light of the bar that made his face, as he kept his eyes on the mug, seem frighteningly harsh. Then a second later he looked up and saw us, and the smile I remembered split his face. "Nathan! Tim!" he called, and came around from behind the bar. "And this must be Paige." "Yeah, Paige, this is Egan Coutts," I said, since Nathan had turned into a total mute and was apparently trying to pretend he was somewhere else. "Paige Morrison." "Hi," Paige said. "Y'all ready to play for me?" Egan asked nicely. "See my little stage? Just big enough for 3 people, isn't it?" The stage was only a wooden platform across from the bar, but to my joy I saw an old upright piano on it. "Hey, is the piano in tune?" "It sure is." I nudged Nathan, who blinked but didn't speak, and Egan gave him a narrow look as we all went over to the stage. "You the leader of the group, Tim?" he asked me abruptly. "The guy in charge?" Not the leader exactly. More like the manager, I guess." Nathan glanced at me gratefully, and Paige smiled. But Egan looked taken aback. His eyes went from me to Nathan and back again, and I started to feel a tad puzzled. It was almost as if he thought I was going to be trouble for some reason. Then he grinned and said, "Well, go ahead and make yourselves comfortable. Need another chair? I don't have a PA, but I don't believe you'll need one. The acoustics in here are great." He hauled another straight-backed chair on stage. "Just start whenever you're ready. I got to go back to bartending. I'm the only one tonight, but I can listen while I do that, and these guys will love it." He looked past me and Paige at Nathan. "Just relax," he said, and smiled again, and Nathan finally met his eyes and nodded back. When he'd gone back to the bar, Paige and I went into a huddle with Nathan a passive third, sort of hiding behind his guitar. "I am not singing Pieces of April to this bunch," Paige declared. "I didn't think about people being here," Nathan said. "It's a bar, Nate. What'd you expect?" I snapped. "You play in front of crowds all the time at school. What are you afraid of now?" "I'm not afraid. I just don't like it. Not for an audition." Paige looked at me wildly. "Well, we've got to do something. This was y'all's deal, remember?" Suddenly Nathan shook his head, got up, and laid his guitar across the chair. Paige and I watched as he went to the piano and ran his hands experimentally over the keys. The pool games and conversation slowed, and faces turned toward the stage, as Nathan went into a version of Ray Charles's Rocking Chair Blues. He could play the hell out of any blues tune, his right hand all over the keys, while his left hand boomed out the steady bass groove. He was completely in charge of that piano, at home with it. "Yeah!" a couple of the pool players hollered. I looked at Egan, who was standing still behind the bar, listening and grinning that white grin. Nathan wound up the song to wild clapping and stamping. He nodded from around the piano and went into one of his own songs that had a bluesy sort of feel. He played more softly on this one because he was singing, but his low voice was still hard to hear. I knew this one well enough to grab his guitar and start playing along. Paige knew it, too. She chimed in on a high harmony line, which I would never even have thought of, and I wondered if Nathan had written it. She did have a great voice, clear and high, with no vibrato. The pool players liked that one, too. In fact, after that, we had them in the palms of our hands, and could probably have sung Polly Wolly Doodle to wild applause. Nathan took his guitar back, and I got mine, and we faked our way through Sweet Judy Blue Eyes, which worked out great with me singing the middle part in the solo lines, and Nathan singing only the lowest harmony whenever it was three-part, concentrating instead on Stills's fanciest guitar stuff. Paige could flatten her voice so it was almost genderless, and it was sure enough magic, just like Nathan had said it would be, the three of us together. It took us an hour to exhaust our repertoire. As we hesitated, Egan motioned us over to the bar and poured us 3 beers. "On the house," he assured us, as we swung ourselves onto the high bar stools. "Well, can I make you an offer?" he said to Nathan, and then gave me a little bow. "Or maybe I should be talking to you, Tim, since you're the manager." "Nate calls the shots," I said. "Nate, then," Egan said. "How about every Saturday night, 9 until closing? I'll pay you $25 each, and you might get some tips if you set up a jar on that piano." Paige nudged me in ecstasy. I hoped she was also nudging Nathan. I'd expected him to hesitate, to say we'd think about it. I'd forgotten how definite he was about anything to do with his music. "Sure," he said. "Sounds fine." "You guys are just what I've been looking for," Egan told us. "Just keep doing what you're doing, and I'll be happy." He drew beer for 2 men wearing caterpillar caps, who slapped me and Nathan on our backs and nodded to Paige. "Where'd you learn to play piano like that, man?" one of them asked Nathan. "Just around," Nate said, and took another swig of beer, probably to avoid having to say anything else. I noticed Egan watching him. At that point I started to wonder if maybe the guy was queer. Like most straight 20-year-old males, I was slightly homophobic. He certainly seemed fascinated with Nathan, and I sure hoped that wasn't the reason he'd hired us. Nathan finished his beer and shook his head at Egan's offer of another. "We need to go," he said in our direction, almost inaudibly. Paige and I drained our mugs obediently, and we went back to the stage to pack up. On the way, Nathan stumbled and sat down heavily on the edge of the stage while he closed his guitar case. I looked at him closely and felt a nip of fear in my stomach. He had the same white, dazed look he'd had outside the church today. I motioned to Paige, and she came over while I put away my own axe. "Is there anything wrong with him that I should know about?" I asked her. "He looks really sick." "I was thinking that, too. No, I've never noticed him like this." "He did the same thing in the parking lot of the church today, just sat right down." We exchanged frowns, then I shrugged and went over to Nathan, who was still sitting and staring at a spot on the floor. I bumped his shoulder with my guitar case. "Come on, let's get going." He looked up with the same unfocused stare I remembered. "Honey, you okay?" Paige asked him. Nathan frowned, as if trying to remember who she was. "Yeah," he said, and to my relief stood up and took hold of his guitar case. "Thanks, guys," Egan called. "See you next Saturday." Paige and I made appropriate responses, and Nathan managed a few nods as everyone handed us affectionately out of there. Outside, away from the air conditioning, the summer night hit like a soft, fragrant powder puff. Nathan stumbled again on the way to the car, and I gave him a look. "One beer does this to you?" "I'm just tired," he said. "You mind driving home?" "Sure," I said, and he found his keys after a bit of fumbling and gave them to me. Paige had to help him get in the passenger side of the car. I loaded both guitars through the station wagon's rear gate, trying to mind my own business while they said good night. But I could see when she leaned in and kissed him, a long, slow, deep kiss that nearly bent me double. You would have had to be dead not to respond to that kiss, and I saw Nathan's hand go up and catch her shoulder, to pull her back down for another one. I slammed the gate a little harder than necessary before I headed around to the driver's side. "See you, Tim," Paige called, and went off to her car. When I slid into the front seat, Nathan had already leaned his head back against the headrest and shut his eyes. As I started the engine and found the light switch, I saw Egan in the doorway of River House. I couldn't see his face because of the lighted room behind him, but from the shine of his blonde hair I knew it was him. He'd been standing there, watching the whole thing. Jealous, I thought, as I headed back toward town. Yeah, I bet he is queer. Hope that doesn't turn into a problem down the road. Once I built a house and closed it in, shut the blinds and walked the floorboards thin, until my heart outgrew the rooms of yesterday, beat the walls until they fell away. Then I built a house and left it wide, hoped for signs and visions from outside. But rain and false decisions came and flooded me, carried all my memory out to sea. One day I'll build a house and let it fly, lifting past the promise and the lie that leaves me still afraid inside the safety zone and homesick in the very lights of home. Now I can hear the unhappiness that disturbed Nathan's mother in this song. It comes through in all of his lyrics, and of course part of that was just his age. To a certain extent, at least until you hit your early 20s, you have to be discontented in order to grow and change, to get anything done. But with Nathan, it had already started to curl back around on him, to become ingrown. And that was the flaw right there. That was what the river man had to start with. He needed something to build on, too, and Nathan's turned-in pain was what he found.